Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I'm honored to have my sis on, but I'm going to let her introduce herself. So why don't you tell people who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Hello. My name is Tracey Battle. I have several hats, right? So I have my own business, Restore to Rebuild. And what we do with Restore to Rebuild is we co-create systems and structures to dismantle the school to prison pipeline, for short. That is what I do by night and day. My full time, I am the District Restorative Justice Specialist within the DCPS District of Columbia Public Schools, and I work with all of the high schools in DCPS to implement, codify their systems to create a system of intervention that will allow students to be able to navigate high school in a very succinct way, but also think about how do we bring the healing back into our schools. And I say back, right? But how do we bring healing into our schools? Because our children need it, our staff needs it, and we need to really think about like what does that look like, feel like, and sound like at our high school levels.
I love that you started there because when we talk about the idea or the need for healing in our schools, I think that there are some folks who would hear that and say healing from what? They've navigated the educational system and they have either assimilated or thrived in those environments. And so now, if they've become educators with that lens, they look back and say, well, I did it. Why can't you do it? And so I guess my first question for you would be, why healing and healing from what?
Things, right? If you really think about it, from generation to generation, Black folks haven't had healing in schools, right? From being in segregated environments and getting taunted, getting bullied, getting chastised, those behaviors that has been internalized and passed down to, our great parents or our great grandparents or our mothers and fathers, right? So this is a generational trauma that our students have been enduring. And yes, we may have been able to do it, but most of us really are probably high functioning anxiety, right? Where we know how to, or we think we know how to navigate these feelings. But then when we get older, we're stuck in a place of like sometimes going crazy, right? Because we're not understanding why we are emoting this way or what is happening with our mental psyche, right? So you said two things that just resonated with me: assimilated and thrived, right? And those two can be pieces of trauma as well. When we think about, let's just think about in the last 2-3 years, right? Vast majority of us have never lived through a pandemic. Yeah. And so we always talk about the displacement of students over the summer. They had displacement for 2 years, right? And so one thing I tell my schools is like, we got to understand we're working in a trauma unit right now. We're working with students who did not have access to school. In some cases, didn't have access to their basic needs, right? And they're coming back and didn't have access to socialization. Now they're coming back into a space and we think that we can put a Band-Aid on it and just move forward. No, we can't, right? We need to really dive in and think about the root of these issues and have those conversations and allow students to feel comfortable enough, students and adults, get the courage enough to speak about what they're feeling. So we can then be able to give them the tools needed to be able to navigate these spaces. And so, yes, we may have did it, but we did it with struggle too. People just didn't communicate about it. We did with, I'm in Washington, D.C. We dealt with the sniper. We dealt with 9/11. We dealt with all these things. And I can't remember one time in my school did we sit down and talk about how it made us feel to be scared to walk to school every day because we didn't know if we would get shot by the D.C. sniper, right? Or if we were scared to walk around and we saw a white van because what we saw on the news is this guy, a clown in a clown outfit is pulling kids, right? And so when we think about our students and we're thinking about bringing the healing back, we really need to be having these conversations because trust and believe, if we get to the point of having these conversations, a lot of our students will surprise you with how they feel, what they know, and how we can be able to support them. And to be honest, a lot of that healing can be healing for ourselves as well. Part of the reason why I got into restorative justice because it was for my own healing. I wanted to become the educator that I needed when I was in school. Yeah. And so I had to think about, like, how do I do that? And this I learned about restorative practices and restorative justice, and I became infatuated. And not only has it helped me in my healing practices with the institution of education, right? But it's helped me in my personal life as well. And so when I say we have to bring healing into schools, if we really want a thriving nation, we really want to thrive, we really want to see students and kids grow, we really have to think about those healing pieces that we're missing. And I know that some schools have like SEL and things like that, but how are we really fixing the root of the issue?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, before we hit record, I was using the analogy like bath fitters, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's this practice of, I don't really want to fix what's underneath. Let me just slap something new over it and hope it works. And when we talk about the idea or the need for healing, folks who miss the relevance, it's either, if I think there's a quote that says, like, if you are not fighting for justice, it's usually because you're full of privilege.
Mm.
And I think that sometimes it insulates us, our lenses. We can't see, we can't aid, we can't support, we can't unlearn because we feel like our privilege is the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And 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 so when I think about this, the need for restorative justice in our schools, I think about how you almost have to now, in the work that you and I both do, is you have to coach people out of harmful practices before you can actually coach them into what it should look like. What are some of the biggest myths, misunderstandings that you've encountered in your journey that folks should unlearn if we're really going to grapple with what it looks like to embody restorative justice in our schools?
I think the biggest myth is that folks believe that restorative practices doesn't come with consequence. That is the biggest misconception that I have come across nationwide, that consequence is not happening. And I think that in some cases, if we don't do restorative practices correctly, then yes, consequence won't happen, right? And I can go into that in a little bit more. The other thing that I think is a big myth is people sometimes have a misconception of the distinction between restorative practices and restorative justice.
That's good. That's
And
good.
so restorative practices is the proactive approach that we take in schools. So students don't have to get to the justice system, the restorative justice system, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are those intentional moves? What are those interventions that we are creating in our schoolhouse to ensure that we are giving them the tools and helping them develop the skills needed to navigate this specific emotion or this specific behavior, right? Or the harm that was caused. And I think that, folks really need to, we do use it interchangeably, but to be very clear, restorative practice is that proactive approach that we take in schools. And restorative justice is when they get to the criminal justice system and then they're trying to find a different intervention. But we don't
Yeah.
want them to get to that place, right?
That
We
part.
don't want them
That
to
part.
get to that place.
Yeah.
But we also know that students are misunderstood, primarily our Black and brown students. If we want to get deeper into it, our females and our male Black students, they are misunderstood. And so when they become misunderstood and we don't have that level of culture, we then want to just isolate them. And that's not what it's about. And so, you said earlier that, having to get to the folks, this is a mindset change. It is a paradigm shift. It's not a moment. It's not a movement. It is a mindset shift. And it is very hard to get folks to change the way they have been activating for so long, right?
Yeah.
That's like you going to your grandmother or your great uncle and you telling him, tell them something that's new, and you're like, nah, and back in my day we did it this way. But guess what? We are teaching a totally new generation of adults. They have a totally new, different way of thinking. Back in my day, we didn't have social media so prevalent.
Right.
That's what they cling to, right? So
Yeah.
how do we create those interventions and those methods to support them, and help them heal? And as we help them heal, help ourselves heal as well.
I think that distinction is key, and I thank you for that push. I think uh, to complement that point, there is a sense in which educators, the adults in the building, feel like restorative practices is just for the kids. And so therefore they miss out on the healing component and the proximity, true proximity that it brings one to another, right? That, to add to the list of myths, if you will, that the bath fitter analogy lends itself here, because what schools will sometimes do is call something restorative, try to do a restorative practice, but never truly build community to begin with. And so then you find, like, well, what are you really restoring kids to if you don't really have a community? And so I would love for you to speak to the prerequisites, if you will. What are some things that we should be thinking through, um, to really do this with fidelity? What are some things that school leaders and teachers and folks, in our school buildings should be thinking about, as they gear up to do restorative practices with fidelity?
I think it's a couple of things, right? I'm just kind of writing some things down that's come to my mind, but one of the first trainings that I provide to my staff is around like anti-racist leadership, right? And we think about socialization, and we
Yeah,
think about how you were raised, so what you think is what you feel you think is the right way to do things. So we navigate socialization, and we also navigate in like biases, implicit biases, and how we might have biases for certain types of group types, right? And so that is actually the foundation of any training that I create, because we have to start there. We have to start at the root. And I grow in these trainings as well. And I actually went to a training years ago, and that's the actually reason why I even start my trainings that way. And I had to dive into my socialization and bias, right? When I was growing up, I thought that I had it rough, right? I thought I lived in the ghetto and things like that, until I grew up, and I'm like, I actually had a very privileged suburban life, right? Like a very, being raised by a single mom. My mom was fortunate enough to obtain a Navy government job when she was young. She had 3 children and never wanted for anything of my basic needs. I had food on my table. I had clothes on my back. I had, lights on. I had a parent at home every night. But because I didn't have the things that I always wanted, I had everything I needed. But because I didn't have everything I wanted, I thought I lived a very, for lack of better words, ghetto life. And that wasn't my experience. And so, going to a training, I remember my first training back in, in that training, we had to really write out our levels of socialization and our levels of bias, right? And I noticed that even in my walk, because I was 5 years in teaching at that moment, even in my walk, I had some biases towards students or particular groups that I had to recognize, and I had to like work through in order for me to be able to lead through a very clear lens. One of the things that I tell folks all the time is, when folks are dealing with trauma, you really operate in a very distorted point of view, and you don't recognize it. You think that's like someone who's never had glasses and thinking that this is life, right? And then you
yeah,
finally get those glasses that fit your prescription, and you're looking around like, I've really been missing out on the world,
yeah,
right? And that's one of the things that we deal with when we operate with restorative practices in schools. Teachers who have, even new teachers, but sometimes our teachers who've been in the game for a very long time, tenured teachers, just kind of sometimes operate in a very distorted view because of what the experience was before. And now we just have a very new generation of students. We have a very new generation of how they're operating. And one of the things that we really got to think through is like, what are the relationships that you're building? Relationship is like that key foundation, right? And being intentional about the relationship, right? I remember I was a principal in Houston, and I remember this young girl. She used to kind of like talk back, right? She used to always have something to say, and I felt it was like extremely disrespectful, right? I was raised when adults are speaking, you don't speak, right? And I remember having to bring her into my office and really just asking her, what is respect to you? And we had to come to a common knowledge of respect, which can be very simple, right? And we assume that everyone has the same alignment with respect. But I had to ask her, what does respect look like? How can I make sure I'm respecting you and allowing her, and me saying, what can you do to respect me? And we had to come to that common language through a relationship in order for me to understand her. Because for me, before that conversation happened, I was being triggered, right? And I recognized my trigger. And so I created an opportunity for us to build a relationship and have that conversation. But even in that simple question, or even in that simple alignment of respect, those are things we have to do nowadays, because our students are not living in the same times in which we lived in.
Right.
And so we have to really try to find that alignment to be able to help them develop the skills. And that's through a foundation of relationship and checking our own self. Like I had to check myself when I felt I was triggered. I had to check myself because my response could have been completely different. And time again, responses have been completely different because as adults, we don't feel like we have to always check ourselves. But no, we do.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That only makes you a better educator, a better teacher, right? But sometimes that can be hard for folks.
It is the paradigm shift from compliance and control to actual community. With the understanding of compliance and control, it is something, going back to the social discipline window, right? You do to someone else versus doing something with your students, right? And that takes a huge paradigm shift. To piggyback off your point, I remember I was teaching middle school math. So I say this all the time, but I was selling a product no one wanted to buy. And as I'm sitting in the class, this young man is in the back, and he is charismatic. He is funny, and he knows it. And so he deflects to humor because we're doing a task that he didn't really want to grapple with. The productive struggle might have been too much, so on and so forth. And I recognize that now looking back, but at the time I just saw disrespect. I asked him to step outside. I had my co-teacher take over the lesson. I go outside. I'm talking to him. I grew up in a military family.
See?
And so when you are addressing, like my grandfather, you look me in the eye, son, when I'm talking to you. So I'm socialized. I have been kind of immersed in, this is what respect looks like. You stand there, you look someone in the eye. And so when this young man is there and he's not looking at me, he refuses, he's kind of looking nonchalant and all of these things, I now know he's grappling with shame. I now know he feels some type of way about the interaction that took place, and he has some uncertainty. I now know that, but at that time, all I saw was disrespect. And because I applied my lens to him, I now have this, counterproductive conversation that I later have to turn around and apologize to him for, because I chose to value my lens when there's two people in the equation.
Exactly.
But I think that the work of, one, knowing ourselves well enough to know that that's our triggers, one, and then the work of relinquishing that assumed power and control is hard for folks. And so I think that there is, to your point, a lot of inner work that educators have to do in order to truly step into restorative practices. Educators continue to have what I'll say is a PhD in how to serve, support, and whatever everybody else, but don't even have, what I'm saying, the basics in understanding ourselves, as though we stop to be ourselves when we step into the classroom.
No,
that's just not true.
Exactly. And as
Please jump in
educators, we're taking in all of those emotions, right? We're taking all of those energies. We're taking all of those things in. And when do we stop to just breathe for ourselves? When do we stop to just think and create our healing? We don't, because we're always everything for everyone else. And we a lot of times forget to take time for ourselves. I'm actually happy since 2020, since COVID, there has been this big movement of like educator wellness that I'm really, really appreciating right now. Do I think that everyone is taking heed to it? No, but I am appreciating that educator wellness, mental health, It's really big for educators. I know that a lot of school districts and their EEOs offer free therapy and things like that for educators, which wasn't even a thing prior to COVID, right? So I am appreciating that. But you stamped it on the neck, like your lens, being able to look through a different lens. And one thing I was thinking about is like, what's easier? What's easier? Is it easier to be able to be understanding and look through that lens, or is it easier to go back and apologize? Right?
Mm-hmm.
We just have to humanize ourselves. We were kids at one point.
Right.
We
Right.
didn't always do what we were supposed to do. I think sometimes educators forget that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it does get hard, right? I call it Shocktober. Everyone always laughs, and I'm like, all right, let's now. Well, we got Shocktober coming up because it's real around that time, right? It's
Yeah.
the longest month without breaks in some districts. And we got to go straight through 31 days, and Halloween ends the month. And so I always try to encourage educators within your scheduling, within your lesson planning, within your calendaring, calendar in a mental health at least twice a month, right? At least twice. And that means like on your planning, go take a walk, right? And that can be something you do every day depending on like your schedule, but go take a walk or shut your computer down, right? Breathe. Like those are some things that we can do for ourselves in the moment to really support our mental space. And there are some, deeper things that we can do as far as like the community building and things like that. But if you don't have that, try to find or try to create some tools in your arsenal to be able to utilize in those moments.
Yeah. I think, to build off that point of knowing yourself, like it's also like what works for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that are going to resonate, that are going to help you restore a sense of yourself? What are things that are going to um, help you grow,
Yeah.
right? I had bought some flowers from Lowe's, and I took them. I repotted them, made sure I did all the things that they say to do. Is you
You'll plant
besides,
that.
I play one on TV. That's kind of my it's kind of my things. So I bought one or two to put in the front. I massage and make sure the roots are kind of there, and then I repot it, and I put it out front, and I'm watering it. And wouldn't you know, like a week or two into it, they start browning and turning, and I'm like, why? I'm doing all the things like that I thought that were good for the plant. I look at the doggone card and I realize that I have them in
You
full
do.
sun,
Sun
but
isn't.
these jokers is partial sun plants.
So it's about the environment. Yeah.
And so I've put them in an environment where they are set up to fail, and now I'm mad at the result.
My goodness. What a word.
And
What
so
a word.
and so what we do in our schools all the time is that we take our babies, we go ahead and put them into an environment, and we're like, all right, I'm watering you with the education in my class. I'm watering you and giving you all the nutrients that I think is for you to grow. Come to find out, they're being burnt, if you will, by the metaphorical sun of our, you know, punitive systems,
Mm-hmm.
our carceral practices, our lenses for how we think consequences should go, with our limited understanding of consequences. And then we expect our babies to thrive and then wonder why we're in the mess we're in.
And we think about it, right? When we think about one thing I always say is like culture and academics have to be a happy married couple, period.
Mm,
There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you don't have the culture in your school and your classroom, your students won't thrive academically. If you don't have the academics, the rigor, your culture is not going to thrive either, right? Like they have to be a very happy married couple. And when we think about the consequences that we put in place, right? And the thing is, like I said earlier, I don't believe that restorative practices is absent of consequences. What I do believe is when you put these practices in place and you have an intervention scale,
yeah, yeah,
suspension is not your first option. It is like your 15th or 16th option in some
that part.
cases, right?
Yeah,
There are several different things that you can create as an intervention for students, whether it's community service, whether it's restitution or writing a letter, whether it's reflection. I remember at a high school, I was director of culture and climate, and we had an issue with students smoking. Now in Washington, D.C., smoking is legal. So students would bring their stuff to school, right? And at lunchtime, they would like go out by the dugout where the baseball field was and just light one, right? It was like, come on, like you're still at school. It's illegal. It's illegal on property, on our school property, right?
Yeah.
And instead of suspending those students, what did I do? I created a substance abuse course. And you had to take that course in the morning before school, right? You had to come from 8 to 9 for 3 days straight before school. And you take that course. And at the end of that course, at the end of the week, you're presenting this information to your specific grade level AP, your specific grade level counselor, so on and so forth, right? Those were interventions that I put in place. So I didn't have to suspend those students. Now, did those students smoke on campus again? No, because they didn't want to go back to that course and present in front of that staff, right?
Right.
So we were able to carve that behavior by simply being creative in how we operated in the school, right? And so I think that it's important that, and that's typically that's what I do, right? I go into schools and I help them co-create and be creative around the interventions. The interventions can be, I'm talking about from community service to working with, I had a student who, he was a hacker. Well, he wasn't a hacker, but he would try to hack certain things, right? He was like very low level. And so I'm like, I saw that he had an interest in IT. And so I set him up with a internship during his lunch period, right? He was a middle schooler. His lunch period, because his lunch fell into recess, and he utilized an internship to learn how to clear computers out, work with the IT system and things like that. And he did that for 2 weeks straight, because that was his consequence, right? For sending links or whatever the case may be to students. We didn't suspend him. We just rerouted, right? And one of the things that I really loved about what I do is that everyone is involved. Everyone. I got the IT department involved, right? I had a student who was throwing food. Okay, you're going to go into this kitchen. You're about to help the cafeteria ladies clean up. Everyone is involved, from the janitorial staff up into the school leadership. Everyone can be a student's champion, right? And that is what community is, because everyone's going to be able to hold you accountable. You're not going to be able to walk into this school with someone does not know you. Everyone knows you, and they're going to be able to hold you accountable. And that's for every student to be able to have that, is it Ubuntu, that village mentality of like, we are going to take care of each other.
Yeah.
And that is what I've seen works. I've seen it. I've helped implement it at several different schools. And when we do it intentionally and we create interventions that work specifically for your school, and we do it with fidelity, we will be able to bring that healing back, because those students will know, like, I can mess up, right? I'm having a chance to get back on track, but I'm also learning a lesson that's attached to this. And anything can be a teachable moment. Now, let's just say you want to continue to do the same thing over and over and over again. Then at that point, you're making a choice with the interventions that we provided to you. And then we can have a different conversation. But at least I can sleep well at night, and I can know that I've tried to give you several different options to carve your behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the important piece to it, what you pushed us to, is to be able to have strength-based approaches to how you see our babies. Because he might be hacking, but yes, he has an interest in and a strength in IT. So let me redirect him there. Yeah, okay, I could suspend these babies for smoking, but what is it that they might not know? What they've been conditioned to believe about this? What might they be escaping from by use
Exactly.
of this? So let me give them the tools and resources to understand the consequences, the natural consequences of said behavior, right? Like it is a strength-based approach that has you move from, again, doing something to the student versus co-creating, reimagining. And I think quiet as it's kept, our babies, children are an oppressed people group.
Yep.
And I don't think we talk about it enough.
They are. They are. From their voices to their actions to they are. We, as adults, it is true, they are very oppressed. They can't speak. We can't speak for themselves. They can't speak clearly. Like we're always shutting them down. I just think about like recently, actually this past school year, I remember I was in the hallway and I was talking to a student about a behavior concern that I saw, and I was like, what's going on? And another student came up and wanted to show me like a picture of what she had been working on, and I just kind of shunned her away. I'm dealing with another student, and she didn't do anything wrong, but I just remember when I turned for a second and saw the shame on her face of like her picture she was trying to show me or something like that, and how I just shut her down because I was so fixated on trying to help this student that I didn't even allow her to use her voice, right?
Yeah.
And so even in that moment, and I definitely went back and had a conversation with her and apologized. I have no problem apologizing to students. That's one thing that people always laugh at me like, you don't mind saying sorry? No, I don't. I don't mind apologizing to students. They are human too. I make mistakes, and I need to be able to model the behavior I want to be able to see. And I just think about like that moment and how she felt, and I wanted to make sure that she knew that I apologized, but also in that moment I should have handled that situation differently. And we came to, she was fine. She gave me hugs and showed me was really excited about it, but that hurt me, right? Whereas years ago, in my maybe the first 3 years of teaching, that wouldn't have affected me at all. But as I'm going through this healing journey with restorative practices, I'm healing, like I said before, I'm healing myself as well. So I'm more susceptible to the energy and the environment that I'm in to make sure I'm not hurting or harming any students.
Yeah. It's going back to what you shared, and it's funny you say Ubuntu, because that's my theme for this year with my staff is how do we build that type of community? I am as we are, right? And as the community goes, so do I, and really valuing. And I say all the time, right? Community happens when I make your problem my problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate that push. I appreciate you sharing your genius with us this evening at the time of the recording.
Yeah.
But I would love for folks to tap in to support your work, connect with you. How can folks do that, and where can they find you?
You can find me on any social network, Instagram, Facebook. I'm also on Threads now. That's a new one.
Okay.
But at Restore, the number 2, Rebuild. So Restore, RESTORE, the number 2, Rebuild, REBUILD. On all social media platforms. My website, www.restore, the number 2, rebuild.org. But yeah, definitely check me out on any social media platforms, my website. I am super approachable. I love to dive in these type of conversations. I love to assist and help because I just truly, truly, truly believe in the power of community and the power of bringing healing into our schools. We need it. We need it for ourselves as adults, and we need to be able to heal ourselves so we can help heal these students.
Can't think of a better place to end our time. So I appreciate you sharing that, and hopefully folks tap in, support you, bring you out. You know what I'm saying? As consultants, the work that we do, I think, I'm always about putting like-minded individuals on because, man, like I said, there's enough work out here for all of us. We need each other. So I appreciate you. If you are a school leader, a decision maker in your district, head to that website, Restore, the number 2, Rebuild, and connect with my sis.
Yes.
Let's see if we can get this restoration popping because folks need it.
Yeah, folks need it. We needed you all. So definitely, reach out to me and I'll, reach back out and we can create something. Even if we got to get you here in DC or I got to come there, just let me know. We'll make something happen.
For sure.
Thank you.